In 1560, a Spanish colonial priest in Cusco watched a large bonfire of knotted cords and publicly called it cleansing. The cords were called quipus. The Spanish called them the devil's record-keeping. They found them and burned every single one. What they were burning was the administrative archive of 12 million people, every census and every tax record kept. The colonial administrator Cristobal de Molina recorded what he witnessed. He described stacks of quipus burning in the public square. He called them books of the devil. The people whose records he was destroying called them the memory of the world. Only about 900 quipus survive today out of thousands. Most were destroyed. What was lost may never be fully recovered. The Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire, governed over 12 million people across more than 4,000 kilometers of the Andes Mountains. It was one of the largest empires in human history, organized without a wheel, without iron, and without any written alphabet. What it had instead was the quipu, a sophisticated system of knotted cords that recorded information across the entire empire. A quipu consisted of a primary main cord from which many pendant cords hung, each tied with knots at specific positions. The position of each knot along its cord and the type of knot used encoded numerical values in base 10. The color of each cord encoded the category of data: llamas, potatoes, soldiers, days, provinces, tribute payments, and more. Specialists called hipucamayuk were trained from childhood to read and create quipus. Their knowledge of the system was their entire life. Census data, tax records, military rosters, grain reserves, historical narratives, and calendrical data all encoded in knotted cords. The system functioned without a written alphabet for over a century across one of the most administratively complex empires ever built. In 1923, anthropologist Leland Locke published the first systematic decoding of the quipu numerical system. He demonstrated that the knot types and their cord positions encoded numbers in a consistent base 10 positional system. This was not decoration, it was arithmetic. The Inca Empire did accounting in the same base 10 mathematical system we use today. Locke's work proved what the Spanish had denied for 3 centuries. The quipus were administrative records, not objects of ritual. Once the numerical system was confirmed, scholars began asking a harder and more consequential question: were some quipus also phonetic records? Could the cords encode language, not just numbers? Could quipus be a writing system the Spanish destroyed before it was read? Spanish colonial records mention quipus being used to record historical narratives, poems, and administrative decisions in detail. These accounts describe quipus that clearly stored more than numbers. The system was more complex than Locke had decoded. The people who could fully read quipus were the hipucamayuk. The Spanish executed many of them in the early conquest period. When the specialists were gone, the living key to the quipus left with them. What remained could only be partially read. About 900 quipus survive today in museums across Europe, North America, and Peru. Each one is a partially closed door. In 2003, Harvard researcher Gary Urton published a landmark analysis of quipu encoding structure and complexity. Urton found that quipus used a binary encoding system based on the direction and type of each knot in the cords. Each cord position could encode up to 7 binary choices, representing hundreds of distinct units of potential meaning. This level of encoding complexity is entirely consistent with phonetic writing systems, not just simple numerical record-keeping. Urton's conclusion was direct. Quipus may be a writing system not yet decoded, rather than only a number system already understood. The Puruchuco quipus, found near Lima in 1956, showed repeated structural patterns across multiple related cords. These patterns suggested strict administrative hierarchy: local totals rolled up to regional totals, then to imperial totals at Cusco. The Puruchuco quipus demonstrated that the system was not personal notation. It was a structured, networked state information system. Spanish colonial administrators understood enough of this system to demand quipu-based tax accounting for the first decades of their rule. The Spanish could not read the quipus themselves. They relied entirely on surviving hipucamayuk as interpreters for their own records. In 2017, the Quipu project at Harvard began applying computational analysis to the surviving 900 quipus. The project digitized cord colors, knot types, knot positions, and cord direction for every surviving quipu in the world. Patterns emerged across quipus from entirely different regions that suggest consistent phonetic encoding of specific recognizable sounds. One cluster of quipus from the village of San Juan de Calata appears to contain narrative text, not numerical data. If confirmed, those quipus would be the first narrative text ever successfully decoded from the Inca recording system. The work is ongoing. The system is not fully decoded yet, but the evidence that it contains language is now substantial. Sabine Hyland, a researcher at the University of St. Andrews, published a 2017 decoding of a narrative quipu. She identified specific phonetic syllables encoded in specific chord configurations within a quipu from Calata. Her work was peer-reviewed and published in Current Anthropology. It was not speculation. It was documented linguistic analysis. The Quechua language survived centuries of colonization in spoken form. Many millions of people across the Andes still speak it today. If the quipus contain Quechua phonetics, the key to decoding them may be the living language itself, still spoken today. The Taki Oncoy resistance movement of the 1560s shows how deeply the Inca understood what quipu destruction truly meant. When colonial authorities destroyed quipus, Inca communities began hiding them. Some of the 900 survivors were protected this way. The quipus that survived often did so because individuals chose to protect them at significant personal risk over generations. Historians Frank Salomon and Mercedes Niño Murcia documented community quipus still in active ceremonial use in the 21st century. The decision to destroy the quipus was not ignorance. It was deliberate colonial policy aimed at replacing Inca governance entirely. A parallel record-keeping system was a threat. If the Inca recorded their own history, they could contest the colonial narrative. The Spanish imposed their own record-keeping in Latin script and declared all other records illegitimate or diabolical. Cristobal de Molina's account of the bonfire was not an isolated event. It was one of hundreds of separately documented destructions. The Third Council of Lima in 1583 formally classified quipus as instruments of idolatry subject to destruction. After 1583, quipu destruction became fully systematic and church-sanctioned across the entire colonial Andean territory. What survived did so because individuals chose to hide what the institutions were formally ordered to destroy on a colonial-wide basis. The European academic tradition classified the Inca as a civilization without writing because most of the writing had been burned. The classification was self-confirming. The evidence had been destroyed. The resulting absence of evidence was cited as evidence of absence. Textbooks today still describe the Inca as a civilization entirely without a writing system. The quipu evidence is very rarely mentioned. The surviving quipus are held in museums in Berlin, Paris, New York, Lima, and scattered across multiple institutions in the Andes. Researchers are still working. The decoding is not complete. Each chord that yields a phoneme is a word recovered from silence. The Inca did not lack writing. They had a system Europeans could not recognize as writing, and therefore chose to destroy. The bonfire in Cusco was not the end. It was the beginning of a problem no one has fully solved. The knots are still there. The chords are intact. The question is whether we read them before the last ones go.